This is a Fox 25 Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Homeless in the Metro.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Adam King.
And I'm Wendy Suarez. Today, we're taking a closer look at homelessness here in the Metro. It is a topic that we have covered extensively over the past few years.
The city, several nonprofits continue working right now to help get people off the street and into housing. And our point-in-time count rose during the last year, but there's more efforts within the city to help get those numbers down.
And joining us now on our panel tonight is Jamie Caves, the program coordinator for Key to Home Partnership, part of the team to help Oklahoma City come up with solutions to help the homeless population, and Megan Mueller, the new CEO and president of the Homeless Alliance, the nonprofit that seeks to end long-term homelessness in OKC. The Homeless Alliance also fills in the gaps for homeless services. So thank you, ladies, both for being here. Let's go ahead and start with this year's point-in-time count. Every year, OKC takes one day to count and survey people who are experiencing homelessness. And this year, there were a total of just over 1,800 countable people. That's about 400 more than last year. So Megan, first of all, were you surprised to see that number rise? And what does that number tell us?
You know, we really weren't that surprised to see the number rise this year, and there are a couple reasons for that. There's always multiple variables that factor into account. The weather plays a big role. This year, we had an additional emergency winter shelter, so we had another 300 of beds added to our shelter system. And obviously, if people are in a shelter, they're easier to locate and count. So that certainly is a variable. On top of that, many of the COVID-era resources that kind of flooded our system throughout the pandemic had expired. And so many of the people who were kind of living on the fringes over the last few years, we weren't that surprised to see that some of them had fallen into the homeless response system.
We hear that there's a lot of variables in the way that this is done, and I think one of the things that maybe people don't realize is because of how this operates and how this has to go, that number could be really a lot higher than what we've actually counted, because there's some people that maybe don't get that statistic in, or as you've mentioned, people that don't get found. So what kind of things do we do? Do we anticipate that that number is higher, and then what do we do to kind of adjust, knowing that we have to shift those figures up maybe a little bit in how we help?
Sure, we really think of the point in time count as like a snapshot of what's going on with the population in Oklahoma City. So it's not, you know, the end all be all data number that we use to drive reporting and developing initiatives. It's a picture of a single point in time, right? So we try to be really careful about how we use that data and think about that data.
And also, I think it's important for folks at home to know that that does not count people who are so-called couch homeless, right? And we know that Oklahoma City Public Schools tries to do a good job of keeping up with how many kids are in the school district, and there are thousands.
Yes, absolutely. So when we are looking at people that are experiencing homelessness for the point in time count, we're looking at the HUD's literal definition of homelessness. So we're counting people that are sleeping in emergency shelters, transitional housing, and places not meant for habitation. So cars and outdoors, abandoned buildings, and places like that. The people that are experiencing couch homelessness or staying on someone's couch, doubled up in housing, those people are not included in this count.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about then also, what are we doing right now then with these figures? What's the first step that you guys do each year? You've been doing this, what, for 10 years?
Well over. So the first count in Oklahoma City was 2003. So this dates back 2 decades now. It's really good to help us identify trend data. So that's certainly one of the first things we look at when we collect all the information. We go through a pretty robust process to deduplicate the surveys that we collect and really clean up that data as best we can. And then, like I said, it's very useful for identifying trends over time. Not the complete picture of the issue.
Any trends that you guys are seeing right now and you want to point out? Because I do know that as we saw our numbers go up in Oklahoma City, cities of a similar size saw the same thing. This isn't just an Oklahoma City problem.
Yes, like Megan mentioned, with COVID-era dollars and the eviction moratorium ended, we were expecting the number of people experiencing homelessness to increase, and it did. It rose 28% in Oklahoma City. That's consistent with Tulsa, increased 26%, and similar numbers were across the country. We did see some trends, and over time we have seen the number of young people, youth ages 15 to 24 have been increasing in Oklahoma City, as well as unsheltered people that have been sleeping outside. And so this information has helped us design some initiatives to focus specifically on reducing the number of people in those populations and have targeted approaches. So with the targeted approach specifically for people experiencing chronic unsheltered homelessness, we were able to see a 14% decrease in that population this year, which is a good indicator that we're making some progress, that those initiatives are working, we're moving in the right direction.
How do you move in the right direction as housing costs seem to get higher and higher? We have a housing crisis, especially for affordable housing. It's like you're trying to chase a problem that's getting worse.
Yeah, yes, there are some challenges, especially with affordable housing. And I work for the city of Oklahoma City, and so we're relying on a broader solution package. So we're also working on a housing affordability implementation plan right now that will look at affordable housing across the community, what opportunities we have to increase the housing stock, provide incentives, and look at different opportunities that we have in the community and tools that we can add to our tool belt to increase the affordable housing stock, because those things really must go in tandem. As we're working to address homelessness and help support people and stabilize in housing, it's just as vital that as our population grows, we're increasing the housing stock so that people can afford to stay in homes.
Otherwise, your homeless population will rise as people fall through the cracks. I think most of us might not realize it. We're 1 or 2 paychecks away from being in this position. A lot of us like to think it's a problem very far away from us. But do you see that there are people that this happens to, that they were employed, they had their lives together on paper, and it can fall apart very quickly?
Absolutely. I think one story that always resonates with me, I talked to a gentleman that was experiencing homelessness, sleeping outside for many years, and his story really resonates. He was working and he had a car problem. It took his savings to repair his car, but he had the savings, and so it wasn't a problem. He made the car repair, continued going to work. Just a few days later, when he showed up to work, the gate was locked and they had gone out of business overnight, which means suddenly he doesn't have a paycheck, he's used all of his savings, and the rent is due. And so now he's in a situation where he just doesn't have any more safety nets and ends up sleeping outside. And there's so much trauma associated with sleeping outside. There are so many challenges, and the barriers pile up very, very quickly, and it's really difficult to get back into housing after you're in those situations. And so coming alongside people and understanding the struggles and providing supports and opportunities to help them meet their basic needs is really important.
Well, it's interesting to hear when you talk about sort of the demographics within the numbers that are seeing those increases more than others. I'd be really interested to hear when you talk about maybe targeting or talking to someone who's 18 years old, the methods you're going to use to tell an 18-year-old or help an 18-year-old that they're going to resonate with is going to be way different than somebody who's in their 30s or 40s or 50s. And I think sometimes because this issue gets talked about a lot in a lot of different cities, it gets forgotten. These are people that have humility and pride, and the way that they experience that is different. So how, working together, do we talk to an 18-year-old as opposed to a 40-year-old, and especially when we maybe don't know the backgrounds or the roots to how they got to the situations that they're in?
Well, I think it's important to remember that we need to approach everyone as an individual. Everyone has different circumstances and different needs, and so our case managers across the community work to identify individual service needs and individual barriers based on each specific person. Additionally, we have programs that are focused on specific populations. So we have several youth providers in Oklahoma City, Pivot, and CSU Youth focus on unaccompanied youth ages 15 to 24 that are serving specifically those young people as they transition into adulthood that for whatever reason have found themselves without the support. Because you're right, the way that you approach an 18-year-old and the services and the intervention are different. They are obviously more vulnerable than adult populations, and they need smaller shelters and more individualized services and some support just, you know, moving into adulthood. As a mother of young 20-year-olds, I understand that transition is really difficult and they need extra support. And opportunities to learn and develop those life skills.
It seems like we have been talking more about, especially that population of kids who maybe was bounced around in the foster care system and then they graduate from the foster care system, they age out of it. Is that what you're seeing a big need in, is those kids?
Oh, absolutely. That's a significant indicator of homelessness, is being involved in the child welfare system. So that's absolutely part of it. There are just a lack of resources. Youth end up needing emergency shelter for as many reasons as adults do. It's varied in individual circumstances, but child welfare involvement is a significant indicator. I think more than 50% of youth that have touched the child welfare system will end up experiencing homelessness.
We already
in their
know
lifetime.
they're at high risk of this.
Very high risk.
Are we getting the support and the resources to handle this properly?
I mean, I think you're talking about a population that's at the intersection of many systems. And when we think about the causes of homelessness, we always kind of think about that intersectionality. Like Jamie mentioned, no two people's experiences are the same. And I think, to your point, a lot of people, that the instinct is kind of to defer to the individual circumstance, to defer to things that impact people on a very individual level. But individual choice is never the whole story. It's always a combination of really large societal factors and systems failures combined with individual circumstance that create these very unique circumstances that each person is dealing with. And so on the provider side, I think one of the most special and unique things about Oklahoma City is how well our providers truly collaborate and work together, and that includes the city of Oklahoma City. We really are all tugging on that same rope and working towards those shared goals. So I think there's that recognition that if someone presents at the Homeless Alliance and they're better served by a youth-specific agency, we have those connections and we're able to facilitate those referrals to get people the most appropriate care that they need.
I do get interested when we kind of talk about how we get people connected to the care that they need, because this is a problem where, like, at cities all over the place. San Antonio is an example where they have the sort of the Haven for Hope situation where it's a one inclusive campus. But when we've had stories on our air, and I think it was David either a week or 2 weeks ago, he talked to some folks that were living in an encampment and they said the words, Oklahoma City doesn't care about us. Mm-hmm. When you hear things like that and you see the work that you put in, we know that's got to hurt, because these are folks that are trying. But it seems that there's a disconnect between the services that we're putting together that we think are what the answers are, and potentially the answers that the people seeking help need or want to see. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we get everybody on the same page? Is it as simple as going out, like in a point in time situation, and talking to people and saying, hey, what would best work for you right now? Or do we have to go to these systemic failures and start fixing those holes to make everything work together?
From my perspective, it's a both and. So I think that is one of the really valuable things about a point in time count, is you do have the opportunity to ask some of those questions. Throughout the years, we've asked different questions of the population depending on kind of the trends that we're seeing nationally. So we have asked questions like, what would have prevented you from finding yourself in this situation, and what kind of services do you think could help you get out of this situation? Those are things that we are continuously asking people. On the flip side, there are policy decisions that get made at the local, state, federal level that impact the work that we do. And so, again, I really see it as a both and.
Is there a policy solution, speaking of policy at the state level, say, is there something our state legislature could do to make your jobs easier?
There are certainly many things that could improve the situation from a policy perspective. So, at the municipal level, I know the city is always looking at zoning codes, ways to promote urban infill in a way that would give us some of those additional units that we need to help resolve the issue. At the state level, something that we continuously go back to as providers is Landlord-Tenant Act. Some of these really simple policies that wouldn't have to change drastically, but that could ultimately move the needle on people falling into this system.
Follow up with the landlord-tenant stuff, because I understand a big challenge is making people understand that the changes that you would like to see would really protect people from these corporate landlords
Correct.
that just don't care. They're not from Oklahoma. They aren't here. This isn't
Correct.
protecting Adam, who might own an apartment in the back. But people don't realize that these guys have so many rights, and they're not even here.
That's very true. Most of the times that we're really struggling with landlords, it's a major corporation. A lot of times it's an out-of-state owner. We're not talking about Oklahomans who are trying to earn an honest living, right?
So that's going to be the challenge, and hopefully getting lawmakers on board this session.
Correct.
What's the number one need when you do go out and you talk to people and you said everybody's different, everybody's an individual? Is there a number one thing when you say, what could help you right now?
I mean, obviously housing, increasing the affordable housing stock, and the ability for people in those low and extremely low income brackets to be able to enter the market. That's obviously the number one need. Outside of housing, the obvious answer is really documents. We find most people have a really hard time when they're experiencing homelessness keeping up with their identity documents. It's really challenging to get employment, to gain access to some emergency shelters, to meet any of your needs, to rent an apartment, and those
Not
things
even
are,
having a cell phone. How do you
Yeah.
apply for rent or apply for a job without a phone number?
Or an address.
or an address. Yeah, so those things are typically the first barrier that we work to address, is helping people get their identity documents so that they're on a track where they're eligible and able to rent an apartment unit, to gain employment, and those sorts of things.
I find it really interesting when we go through this. I was even talking to somebody about this morning. I said, hey, we're doing this town hall. It's going to be great. And they said, oh, yeah, there's an encampment that's right around the corner from my house. Like, you should talk to them, and we should get this out of here. When you hear people talk about that, and then we look at our volunteer numbers, you folks can't do some of the things you do. That includes point in time without people who are willing to put in the skin in the game and the sweat equity to help this situation. It's one thing to say you care. It's another thing to do what you two do and go at this every single day. Do you find that your volunteer efforts have gotten better or worse over the last couple of years? Has it stayed the same? Are you getting enthusiasm from people who not just say they want answers to this, but are willing to do something about it?
I think so. I think we see an increase in volunteers. The community is really rallying around homelessness, and there's a significant effort to make a difference, and people are willing to support our partner agencies. There's lots of different opportunities to volunteer across the community. We encourage them to work with the people that are experts so they can be strategic about the efforts that they're making, but we do see a lot of community support.
I would echo that. Our mission is rallying the community to end homelessness. So I love that you use that word in your response, right? But it's so true. And we take a really literal and broad approach to that. Community means all of us. And we really believe that as a community, we're stronger and better when all of our neighbors have a place to call home. When everyone is thriving, that's good for the entire community. So I echo that. I really do see that attitudes in our city towards this issue have been shifting.
There's a stigma, and I was going to ask, is that getting better, and what are you doing to tackle that stigma?
There certainly is a stigma, but I'm encouraged by kind of the response we've seen, especially over these last few years. I think that a lot of these collaborative initiatives have done a lot to destigmatize the issue. One of the programs we have at the Homeless Alliance, the Curbside Chronicle, it's a street paper. We have folks selling magazines all over town. I really believe that's done a lot to destigmatize the issue of homelessness, because it's facilitating interactions between members in the community that maybe wouldn't have happened organically. But I think that when we have those positive interactions, it reminds us that people experiencing homelessness are people, right? They're people's moms and dads and sisters and brothers. They're people just like you and me. And I think that when we can kind of remove some of that stigma and help each other see the humanity, that's when we can really see some of those, again, attitudes shift and progress be made.
Yeah, shout out to Curbside. I love the curbside flowers.
Yeah.
Walking in and getting a floral bouquet, it really does kind of add a different layer of understanding and interacting with that community.
Absolutely. And again, it makes those interactions easy. We've all been in a situation when we pull up on the corner and we see someone asking for money, and that can be a really tricky situation as a person in a car. You don't always know what to do. I always tell folks a really simple way to handle those interactions is to smile and wave. You know, be a nice person. Oftentimes people experiencing homelessness, they're used to being ignored and overlooked. And so I think, again, just something as simple as recognizing like, hi, I see you and I'm going to be friendly. You know, they call Oklahoma City the big friendly. That's not for nothing, right? If we can just, even something as simple as that gesture can make a difference.
I've never thought of loneliness being one of the aspects of homelessness that goes unnoticed.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, right? And you smile, wave, and again, I think you kind of mentioned it with the stigma, and we get everybody involved, and that Oklahoma standard can come in a big way, and everybody can use this. All this has to be, to an extent, is people helping people, right?
Absolutely.
And we can get so much more done. One thing I do want to ask about, we were going to get through a whole half hour without me asking about this. When you go to a veteran community, and this is a state that takes care of their veterans better than any place I have ever lived in my entire life, but this is a group of men and women that do not have an easy time asking for help or seeking out help. And sometimes if you seek them out to help them, they don't want it. Is there anything in particular when it comes to the veteran population that's experiencing homelessness that you're doing in particular to make sure that those people who have put it all on the line for our country are getting taken care of?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, you know, we work really closely with several partners. So HUD-VASH through the VA, the SSVF program, they do a great job of creating, you know, veteran-specific services. And I will say, you know, over the last several years, veterans have been kind of a population that we've focused on as a community. You know, you're exactly right. They're overrepresented in the population, and that's just wrong. It just shouldn't be that way. And I think as a result of that focused effort, we have actually seen the overall percentage of veterans who are experiencing homelessness in our community decrease. So at this last year's point in time count, it was around 7% of the population. We had been hovering closer to 10%, which is pretty consistent with the national average. So that focus and those efforts have made a difference. And I think that that's a great example of how some focused efforts, really similar to what Jamie's leading with the Key to Home initiative, can do when we're all focused on those shared goals, we can move the needle.
Before you guys go, tell us on these initiatives you're working on, what your main goals are right now, and what help is available.
So we are working on lots of things to improve the strategic alignment and resources across the community with more than 50 service partners, and they're really doing the heavy lifting. But with the Key to Home, we have developed a couple of initiatives focused specifically on those populations where we've seen troubling increases. So with people that are experiencing chronic unsheltered homelessness, so sleeping outside, we've developed an intervention focused on that population, the Encampment Rehousing Initiative. Our goal is to take services to an encampment and close camps one at a time across the city. So we take services to them, we provide everything they need on site, we go every day to really push action and drive quickly towards housing, and then we offer housing and provide it to everyone at the camp. So we're moving everyone at that site into housing with supportive services for 12 months.
They're not just getting pushed off to another neighborhood.
That's correct. So this is really the only solution in order to keep from just pushing them from one site to another site to another site until this person complains and then they complain. And so just instead
That's really
of just
been the
pushing them
system
around,
for a long time.
That has
a
been
lot of places.
Yeah. So the Encampment Rehousing Initiative really seeks to make that different. Housing is the solution. So we're offering people housing, providing supportive services. We've housed 332 people with the service partners over the last year. Our goal is to house 500 by the end of 2025, and we're well on our way.
You think you're going to get there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what about you guys? Anything you're working on right now besides, you mentioned focusing on the veteran population? increasing communication and partnership between everyone working in this. What else do you want people to know about the work you're doing?
Yeah, I think another really exciting initiative that we're piloting as a community right now is diversion. So Jamie mentioned, just the experience of homelessness can be really traumatizing. That's not a fun experience for anyone, and we want to avoid it as often as possible. And so in collaboration with the city, we're working on this idea that we're diverting people from our system entirely. So if we can move our intervention a little further upstream and catch people before they're accessing shelter, we can save folks, the trauma of the experience, and we can help them resolve their situation more quickly and for less money.
Sounds like maybe perhaps changing those landlord-tenant laws. That would be an example of that early intervention.
Yeah,
Just keep coming back to that.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
They kind of got you in your bag there.
I know.
I just think you'd be surprised about how
for sure.
much control those out-of-state landlords have, and we want to protect Oklahomans first and foremost. So, all right. Anything else our viewers need to know as they're learning more about this topic, and maybe they're learning something new or looking at homelessness maybe a little differently for the first time?
If they want to see the service partners and all the work that we're doing and keep up with the progress that we're making in the community, they can go to keytohomeokc.org.
Yep, totally. And I'd echo that and just say again, there's plenty of ways to get involved. If people want to share, their time and their talents, there are dozens of providers in the community who would love to have them.
There's a place for you to
plug in. So go to Key to Home, find out who those partners are, and give us a call.
Love that. Well, if you would like to learn more about this issue and the challenges facing the homeless, head to our website, okcfox.com, and search for Homeless in the Metro. We will have links and resources, as well as info from all of our other stories on this topic. Thank you so much for joining us for this Fox 25 Town Hall.